Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, I'm Jovan Buha, Lakers beat writer for The Athletic, and welcome to episode 59 of Buha's Block. On today's episode, we are going to be doing another mailbag. There is a lot to touch on, a lot to get into with the Lakers 4 games into the preseason. I am back in LA for about 24 hours. Just got back from Las Vegas and we'll be going to San Francisco. Will not be there tonight in Phoenix for the front end of the Lakers back-to-back. It is also your boy's birthday. I turned 32 today. It's my Magic Johnson year. I'm getting up there in age. I feel like an old man now, but could not think of anything better to be doing today than doing a podcast with all of you and watching some Lakers basketball and then talking about it tonight with another post-game reaction. We'll be going live since I will be in my home studio, still trying to figure out the road setup, and I've been having some mic issues and Wi-Fi issues in different hotels and stuff, but at least for the home games for now, we are good to go live and not have to remote record a post-game reaction. And that's part of why I'm doing a mailbag today, is I haven't been able to get into some of the questions that you guys have had recently over the last few days. Been trying to do more lives and answering all of your questions, interact with you all as much as possible. So that's what I want to do today. I posted a community note that I was going to be doing a mailbag, and if you had any questions, so got some good responses for that. So let's get into it. But before we get started, as always, for those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video if you enjoy it. And for those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. All right, let's get into the mailbag. First question from @BrandonCarroll6936. Can Austin realistically be a 20 points per game scorer this season? He's so efficient and effective in this offense. It seems as if he could definitely see an increase in volume and his overall usage rating. Well, Brandon, you are correct. Austin has seen about a 2% increase in his usage percentage per NBA.com/stats this season. So far in the preseason, again, only a few games and it's the preseason, but he's had about a 2% increase in his usage percentage compared to last regular season. It's gone about from 20% to 22%, which might not sound like much, but it has made him the clear number 3 in the offense so far. And D'Lo has actually had the inverse of going from about 22% last regular season to about 20% this preseason. So we'll see if that holds up into the regular season, but I expect it will. And as we talked about in some of the preview content entering the training camp and the preseason, all of the buzz over the offseason has been the Lakers trying to empower Austin Reaves, put the ball in his hands, and make him more of a scorer and a playmaker. And I wondered, theoretically, it was probably going to come at the expense of D'Angelo Russell, but I did wonder, is that a little bit less AD? Is that a little bit less LeBron? Is that a little bit less D'Lo? Is it kind of a chipping off a little bit from cumulatively everybody and not just adding that to Austin? Or is it going to come more at the expense of one particular player? And in that case, it would probably end up being D'Angelo Russell. And that's so far what we've seen through the first 4 preseason games. Austin has he's actually technically taking 2 shots fewer per game than D'Angelo Russell, but he's averaging 7 free throw attempts per game compared to 0 for D'Angelo Russell. So when you factor that in, that is the difference in their usage percentage and the difference in Austin averaging a couple more points per game than D'Lo. But to answer your question, I'm going to say Austin can average 20 points a game, but I don't think he's going to. And the reason is, I just think there's so many mouths to feed in this Lakers offense. You're going to have LeBron and AD at mid to high 20s in terms of points per game. You're going to have D'Lo and Rui somewhere in the mid-teens. And that's to say nothing of Max Christie potentially having a bigger role off the bench, Gabe Vincent potentially bouncing back to his Miami self as a guy who could get 8, 10, 12 points a night. And even a guy like Dalton Knecht, who projects to be in the top 9 of the rotation and has already, we've seen, played a big role offensively for the Lakers as a bench scorer and a bench shooter and just a shot creator. So I think the Lakers have a lot of offensive firepower. Now, I could easily be wrong based on injuries or maybe some of the bench guys struggling a bit, in Austin having to have an increase in his minutes or his usage based on that, and the Lakers just running things more through him. Like, I think if LeBron goes out, I could definitely see Austin averaging 20 points a game. If D'Lo goes out or D'Lo is traded and the Lakers don't bring in another lead guard type, I could easily see Austin hitting that 20 point per game mark. But it's difficult to have 3 guys on the same team averaging 20 plus points per game, especially when you have other guys like a D'Lo and like a Rui heavily involved in the offense. And I expect those guys to at least be around 14, 15 points a game as they were last season once that starting lineup formed. So for me with Austin, it's mainly like, I think he's capable of averaging 20 points per game. I think if he was put in a role where the Lakers needed him to average 20 points a game, or he was empowered and that was like a goal for the offense, like, let's get Austin to average 20 points a game, or we think he needs to be at a certain level offensively for us to thrive, I think he could do it. And I think he's shown he's capable of it in the regular season. I think he's shown he's capable of it in the playoffs. So it's not really a matter of, is Austin capable of doing it? I just think it's a matter of the Lakers have a clear number 1 and number 2 in their offense, the 2 guys that are typically in that top 10, top 15 scoring conversation, and having 2 high usage guys like LeBron and AD, and then also having several high usage role players, I think it just puts a certain ceiling on Austin's scoring potential as things are currently constructed. Now, what I will say is I do expect Austin to be the 3rd leading scorer in the on the roster. I expect him to be the number 3 option throughout the regular season and usurp some of D'Lo's shot creation and playmaking and usage overall. So if we go back to last season with D'Lo, he had about a 22% usage percentage, and he averaged 18 points a game. So I think that is a realistic expectation for Austin, especially if we see some of these things carry over from the preseason in terms of him getting back to the free throw line, averaging 7 free throw attempts per game so far, and just his 3-point volume increasing. And he has not shot the ball well. He's been dealing with an ankle injury, and I'll get to that with one of my later questions. But Austin has not been himself from a shooting and efficiency standpoint, but he has increased his usage. He is getting back to the free throw line, more so like the 2022-23 season. And I think that combination, also with him upticking his 3-point volume a little bit, that's where you can see him go from, I believe he averaged 14 points a game last season, all the way up to 18. And then potentially, depending on the health of LeBron or AD or D'Lo, if one of those 3 guys goes out, then all of a sudden I see Austin averaged 16 points a game last season, but with a potential increase in usage and in free throw attempts and in 3-point attempts, I could see that bumping up to 18 or 19 points per game. But with the current information that we have and the way that the first 4 preseason games have been, about 18 and a half points would be my current expectation. Next question from @It'sYourBoy8054. Outside of bigs, what other needs do the Lakers need to address? To me, the Lakers' biggest roster need is actually a wing and not a big. I think a big is number 2, and it's a close number 2. But to me, someone who blends the strengths of Rui and Vando, someone who can shoot like Rui, punish mismatches, crash the offensive glass, and cut along the baseline, do some of those things offensively, and even go ISO or post up with second unit reps, or if LeBron or AD is out, someone like that, and then defensively take on the primary wing assignments, make it so LeBron can defend the weakest front court guy and help AD with rim protection and backline rotations and just protecting the rim overall, defensive glass, etc. So that player is not exactly easy to find. It's an expensive player. It's a player that, based on the Lakers' tradable contracts and assets, like I would expect that player to cost at least one first-round pick, if not two. And that is a steep price to pay, and a price I'm not sure that the Lakers are willing to pay. I think it remains to be seen how the first 30, 35 games go, where the team is at in early to mid-January, and if they're in the playoff mix or high play-in mix, maybe they end up making a move. If they're low play-in mix or out of the play-in mix due to injury, underperformance, whatever, then they probably stand pat. So I think that remains to be seen in terms of the Lakers' appetite for a trade and what that could potentially look like, which players. I think we have a general idea of it would likely have to be some combination of D'Lo, Rui, Vando, and Gabe. Those are their four most tradable contracts, and really four most expendable contracts in terms of, like, you're not trading LeBron, you're not trading AD, they're not going to trade Austin. They want to keep Max, they want to keep Dalton. So that they have their younger guys that they're valuing, and obviously the two superstars on the team, and then it's some of those mid-sized role player contracts that could be moved, as well as the two tradable first round picks. And then they have a few pick swaps. They have a few second round picks. So the Lakers have more assets than I think people realize, especially with the pick swaps. I feel like that gets left out of the asset conversation too much. And especially with the uncertainty with the Lakers and the rest of the decade, and how LeBron's going to play, and how AD is going to age into his mid-30s with all the injuries that he's dealt with. Like, I think those pick swaps have some potential value, potentially high value across the league in potential trade talks. So whether it's like a first round pick and a pick swap or a couple pick swaps, whatever, like I think the Lakers have the assets to go get that type of player. The question is who's that player, right? I've been higher on Jeremy Grant than some people are. I don't think he's worth 2 first-round picks. Is it maybe a pick and a pick swap? Like, maybe that's a compromise that the Lakers and Portland can work out at some point. I do think that Jeremy Grant profiles similarly to Rui Hachimura in terms of strengths and weaknesses, and defensively has slipped a bit since his Denver days, is no longer that wing stopper, but I do think is a better wing defender and a more versatile wing defender than Rui, and then offensively is actually statistically a better shooter than Rui over the last couple of years, and clearly has the skill to be the number 3 option in a good offense. I think he's shown he could be the number 1 on a bad team and a bad offense, but him being the number 3 or number 4 guy, I think is a proper slotting of his skill set. And the contract is not good, and the contract is the biggest drawback, and I acknowledge that. I admit that. That's why I don't think he's worth 2 first-round picks. But I think there's a notable gap between Rui and Jeremy Grant, and with him having some of that length and athleticism that Vando has, doesn't play with the same motor, is not the same caliber of defender, and ideally maybe you keep Vando in that trade, and it's something like D'Lo and Rui going to Portland, or D'Lo getting rerouted to a third team. Lakers would have to figure that part out. But if there's a way to upgrade and go from Rui to Jeremy Grant, that to me would be a solid upgrade for the Lakers. But I think they need that starting caliber wing who's 6'7" to 6'9", relatively athletic, relatively skilled offensively, has to be able to space the floor. That's like a minimum offensively. They don't have to necessarily be that Rui, Jeremy Grant type scorer, but that's a plus. But I think be able to shoot 36 to 40% on threes, and then be able to defend at least better than Rui could. And it's going to be hard to find someone as skilled defensively as Vando, right? Because again, if we're talking about a player that might not exist, or a player that's like a max player, an all-star player, making $40+ million a year. So to your point, I think the big man situation is its own thing, and maybe you split the difference and say, can we get a shooting big, a stretch big who can protect the rim and space the floor, a Brook Lopez type, a Miles Turner type, a Wendell Carter type. Wendell Carter is no longer eligible to be traded after signing his extension with Orlando. Miles Turner, I think it's like that ship has probably sailed with him, with the success that Indiana has had with him, and just his increased play over the last year or so. And then Brook Lopez is on the decline, and I think if the Lakers were going to acquire him, or Milwaukee was going to trade him, that probably would have happened over the summer. So I don't like, those are 3 player archetypes that could fit what the Lakers need. I don't think either one of those 3 is going to end up on the Lakers, or probably end up being traded. And Wendell can't be traded, but I don't think Miles Turner or Brook Lopez will be traded either. So like that type of player, I guess, could technically split the difference of like adding a big who could start next to LeBron and AD or come off the bench and play next to AD in certain lineups, be an upgrade over a Jackson Hayes and a Christian Wood. But outside of that, I think that they're probably two separate needs, two separate players. And one to me is a better two-way wing who has some of the strengths of Rui and Vando, the best of both worlds for the Lakers from that starting, that third front court starting spot, and then a better backup big, better player than Jackson Hayes and Christian Wood, a sturdier, bulkier, defensive-minded big who can play 12, 15 minutes a night, maybe play next to AD in certain lineups, but at a minimum, just protect the rim and protect the paint for the 10 to 12 minutes a night, 80s off the floor. So the Lakers can plug those two areas of need. I think they're going to be in a really good place in the Western Conference. Next question from @4iFu. What is the realistic ceiling for Rui? At his best, what can he be? JJ has said that Rui has been really paying attention to the school side of the film study and has demonstrated in 4 games of the preseason at least an effort to rebound. What can his peak be? I like this question because I'm not sure I have an answer for it. I'm going to try to answer it for you right now. But let's go back to last season, just because I think that sets a baseline for Rui. So he plays in 68 games, averages just under 27 minutes a game, averages 13.6 points per game, shoots 54% from the floor, 42% on threes on just 3.4 attempts per game, 74% at the free throw line, only 2 free throw attempts per game, 4 rebounds a game, 1 assist, and then about half a steal and half a block per game. And so if we use those numbers as a baseline for Rui or as a launching point, because I don't think this is his peak yet. He's only 26. He still has another year or two until he's in his physical prime based on the typical aging curve. I think the averages of just under 14 points a game, 4 rebounds a game, I think those could get up to 16, 17, maybe even 18 points a game. I don't think it's going to happen as long as he's playing next to LeBron and AD and Austin and DLo, because he's clearly the 5th option in the starting lineup. And there's just a ceiling to the offensive production in that system. So I think really we're talking about Rui potentially being traded and him being in a different environment. And maybe he's more like the number 3 option for a team. That's where I could see him averaging somewhere between like 16 to 18 points a night. I think the rebounding could get up to 6 or 7 rebounds a night. That's probably going to be his peak. I have been encouraged, especially in the previous game against the Warriors. I will say the Warriors are obviously a smaller team, a team that relies on its guards to get rebounds. So like I think if anything, that was a bit of an advantageous matchup for Rui. And I think the teams that give Rui a bit more trouble are the bigger teams, the teams like Denver and Minnesota, this year potentially Oklahoma City, though now they're dealing with the Isaiah Hartenstein hand injury that's going to keep him out for about 5 to 6 weeks. But like the teams that play the 2 7-footers or the 2 6'10" guys that are big and bulky and take up space and are good rebounders, like those are the types of teams that bother Rui from I think a rebounding perspective. But to get back to your question, like I think if we're talking about, I think there's 2 answers here, where there's Rui's ceiling with the Lakers and there's Rui's ceiling in general. So I think with the Lakers, I don't see him averaging, again, 13.6 points a game. Maybe that could creep up to like 14 and a half, 15. I just don't see it getting much higher with him being the 5th option. And again, we're taking everything at face value here of like Lakers not making a trade or LeBron and AD not being injured for a significant amount of time. Obviously, if LeBron or AD goes out, I expect Rui to be relied upon more heavily offensively and have a bigger role and more usage, more shot attempts, all that stuff. So like, if we're just assuming everyone's relatively healthy and this is a relatively normal season and the roster is what it is and LeBron and AD are available, then I see Rui in that like 14 and a half point role and just as the 5th option. But I think the rebounding could certainly go up. I think AD needs help on the defensive glass. I think Rui has an opportunity to step up and step into a bigger role from a rebounding perspective. So that would be the biggest area for him is like, he just never, like I remember going back to last season, I think he had 2 double-digit rebounding games all year. And I think that's something that I would like to see increase and get into the double digits of, can you have 15 or 20 double-digit rebounding nights? And it's tough when you're playing a certain amount of minutes and maybe you're playing a little bit more on the perimeter, out of position. Because Rui's really, the other thing here is like Rui's playing out of position with the Lakers. He's really a 4, and he's being asked to play the 3 next to LeBron and next to AD, and he can do it, and the Lakers can have success with it, as we've seen. But really, if we're optimizing Rui, he's more of a 4 than a 3. So that's my answer for Rui with the Lakers. As for Rui, if we're trying to optimize Rui with likely a lottery team, and he's a starter, and maybe he's the second front court option and like third. Maybe this team has a good front court scorer and a good backcourt scorer, and then Rui's like the third guy. And again, I'm saying this is a lottery team. This is not a good team. I could see Rui putting up 17, 18 points a night. Again, 6, 7 rebounds a night. Maybe a couple of assists. I think really the thing for Rui is just being more engaged defensively. Like if we're just taking the numbers out and just talking about like what's the optimal version of Rui, I do think it's him more at the 4 than him more at the 3. But him rebounding better and defending better are 2 low-hanging fruit areas of improvement for Rui. And a lot of it comes down to effort and awareness. And this is something that he talked about after I asked him about the rebounding in Las Vegas after the Golden State game, of just talking about going over those film sessions that you referenced in your question with JJ Redick, with the coaching staff, and learning about different rebounding angles and different places to be, and really seeing and breaking it down the ways that he can be more effective as a rebounder. So I think if Rui can have a better effort and awareness and understanding about both the defensive and offensive glass, because offensively he can corner crash and attack along the baseline. If he can increase his rebounding and be a better defender, that's the area. Like offensively, I feel like Rui's almost at his peak already. Like you could always be more efficient. You could always be a slightly better shooter. Like he could probably ramp up his 3-point volume a little bit, which is what JJ wants. And if he can maintain that 40-ish% on 4 or 5 attempts per game, rather than 3.5, like that's a plus for the Lakers. But I think really with Rui, it comes down to the other stuff, the little stuff, the details. So again, I think there's a difference between optimizing Rui with the Lakers and optimizing Rui in general. In general, I think it's more of him at the 4, asking him to guard more power forwards, and then running more sets and actions for him. But with the Lakers, I think it's kind of a similar offensive role. It's just getting him to do more role player things at a higher level. So I hope that answers your question. But I think Rui, so far, there's been some progress with the rebounding. Well, we've seen it in spurts before, so I don't want to overreact and feel like he's changed or turned a corner until I see it more consistently. But if the Lakers can unlock that, if the coaching staff can unlock that from Rui, like I think he's a guy you can easily play 30, 32 plus minutes a night in the regular season and potentially be a better playoff performer come April. Next question from AYHUIOJG. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce that. I would butcher it, but I'm shouting you out. Is it feasible to play D'Lo and Reaves together defensively? Would Max be a better alternative so Reaves can come off the bench and have more on-ball opportunities? I think there are a lot of interesting directions to take with this question. First, I will say, I think the Austin DLo backcourt is viable in the regular season. We've now seen with Vando as the 5th starter in 2022-23, or with Rui as the 5th starter in 2023-24, those lineups and those teams won at 50-plus win paces with that starting lineup of Austin and DLo in the backcourt together. So I think from a regular season perspective, you could win in the high 40s or even low 50s with Austin and DLo as your starting backcourt. Now, I think you need to be careful about playing them too much together, and I think it's ultimately best to stagger them throughout the course of a game, but starting them together in the first and third quarter and even closing with them together in certain matchups, I think works. I think it works at a high level in the regular season because both of those guys are so skilled offensively. Now, when it comes to the playoffs, that's where the concerns come in. More so on D'Lo's end than Austin's end. When it comes to the playoffs and you can scheme against those two and pick on them somewhat defensively, and when you can put a more athletic, more physical guy on D'Lo and really disrupt him, that's where, to me, there is a limitation or a ceiling to how those two can function together as a backcourt tandem. So that's ultimately why I think the Lakers need to split them up. And whether it is bringing one off the bench or trading one of them, and I really think it should be D'Lo getting traded and probably D'Lo coming off the bench. That's the longer term answer for me. So short term, regular season, I think it works. Long term, playoffs, I don't think this is a viable starting backcourt. And I don't think the Lakers think that this is a viable starting backcourt. And that's why they tried to trade D'Angelo Russell last season. That's why they tried to trade him after he opted in. And that's why I expect they will try to trade him around the February 6th trade deadline. Now, the second part of your question I find fascinating because I think this has been the prevailing theory around splitting Austin and DLo up has been, Austin was the guy last year who excelled off the bench and to start the season, and he was at that Ginobili role, and he clearly handled it well. And I think that the Lakers felt he would handle it better than D'Lo would handle a potential benching. They were afraid of potentially losing D'Angelo Russell last year, and that was part of the reason why they didn't bench him in the Denver series, the Western Conference Finals series back in 2023. But with what we talked about from the first question of the Lakers running more of the offense through Austin compared to D'Lo, having him be more of the point guard, more of the on-ball guy, having him ramp up his usage. And that's where things get interesting to me because I would say, well, in general, I've been on record. I think Austin's the better player. I think he's the more impactful player. I also think his game translates better to the playoffs. So if you're going to be playing D'Lo one way in the regular season and then reducing his role, to me, I'd rather just have Austin be the starter, play 32, 34 minutes a night, and then potentially ramp that up in the playoffs rather than it being Austin's a six man, D'Lo's the starter, but now we're in the playoffs and we're almost flipping their roles where maybe D'Lo's the placeholder starter, but he's playing less and less minutes, and now Austin's playing more. He's closing over D'Lo, etc. So from a long-term health of the team, Austin is the guy who I expect to be with the Lakers beyond this season. He's got a couple more years with them. D'Lo is about to be an unrestricted free agent, so I would suspect if he's not traded by the trade deadline, D'Lo probably ends up signing elsewhere this summer. So I think looking at the big picture, you don't want to upset Austin and bring him off the bench again. You don't want to move him to the bench, and you're already empowering him and giving him a certain role offensively. So the thing that makes the most sense to me, if you are going to split them up, number one, it's probably just trading D'Lo to split them up. But if you're not going to trade D'Lo, I think him actually coming off the bench and being more of the sixth man, you start Max and you bring in when LeBron subs out, you bring in D'Lo and you kind of stagger LeBron and D'Lo a bit. And then D'Lo gets some reps with AD, gets some reps without Austin, and you're playing him 26, 28 minutes a night off the bench. And he's actually, it's sort of like when D'Lo's out there, just go crazy, go do your thing, take as many shots as you want. You're going to be very high usage. Maybe ends up even being a higher usage player than Austin, just because he's having the ball so much with those second unit lineups. So I actually think with the way that the Lakers are trending, it would actually make more sense to bench D'Lo rather than Austin, because it was one thing when Austin was the fourth guy and was the lower usage guy. I think there was some diminishing returns there and concerns about are you losing Austin's effectiveness at the expense of maximizing D'Lo and sort of empowering him? Now I think it's the opposite, where are you almost losing the effectiveness of D'Lo at the expense of maximizing and empowering Austin. So like my guess is the Lakers will proceed with them as the starting backcourt. And this is just a theoretical discussion, a theoretical debate, a theoretical analysis in terms of what it would look like with one or the other coming off the bench. I think both are going to be the starters moving forward. I think if the Lakers were going to bench one of them, it would have already happened. However, I think we get into an interesting situation with like who's closing games. Like, is Max or Gabe closing over one of the two? And again, I would suspect D'Lo's been open about like wanting to be better defensively and wanting to not be an offense-defense type sub. Like in the past, it's been D'Lo subbed out, particularly later in games because of his defense. So that's something that's on his mind. He's trying to be better with, but I also think there's a chance that Gabe or Max just ends up closing over D'Lo in a lot of situations. So I think if I had to pick, I would actually move D'Lo to the bench and start Max. I don't think that's going to happen. And I think it's going to be those two continue to start together. And then if they do end up getting split, it's because of one of them being traded and almost certainly that player being D'Lo and not Austin. So I kind of tried to answer your question in a couple different ways. But again, like in short term, regular season, I think it works. Longer term playoffs, I don't think it works. And I think the Lakers are aware of that. And they're going to try to address it, most likely by trying to trade D'Lo at some point. Next question from @BHushan Pimpalker 8466. Probably just butchered that. I'm sorry. Austin seems to have dropped his efficiency in scoring the little time we have seen him in this preseason. Is this due to the sore ankle or is he just ramping up? I think it's a combination of both the sore ankle and Austin ramping up. We have seen that Austin tends to get off to slower starts from a shooting perspective and progressively shoot better throughout the course of the season. If you go back and look at the month over month shooting splits, he tends to shoot better in the second half of the season. I think his rookie year, he had a little bit of the rookie wall there, but for the most part, Austin progressively has gotten better as seasons have gone along. So I expect that to be the same thing. I think overall, if you look at the Lakers, like this is not an excuse by any means, but if you look at the Lakers shooting splits as a group, as a team, a lot of guys aren't shooting well. I think you're highlighting Austin and he's probably had the biggest gap or one of the biggest gaps between his preseason production and his regular season production in terms of shooting efficiency and percentages and just our expectations for him. But I would not overreact or read too much into it. I think he's adjusting to a new role with having the ball in his hands more, being more of the number 3 guy. I think there's multiple factors here. He's also been dealing with this ankle situation that kept him out of the Milwaukee game and also had him on a minutes restriction against the Warriors. But I would say in terms of positives with Austin in the preseason, again, 7 free throw attempts a game is going back to the player that he was a couple years ago. From a percentage perspective, I'm going to answer a question in a second about Dalton and similarly his struggles. And like, I think it's too early to overreact or get too concerned with a player struggling in the preseason. If this lasts a few weeks, 4 to 6 weeks into the season, then we can have a different conversation about it and potentially adjusting his role or just trying to get to the crux of why is he struggling. But for now, I'm going to give it, as JJ likes to say, give some grace. And with Austin, new role, new season, he's gotten off to these slow starts before. He ends up being fine. He's dealing with an ankle injury. I think he's going to be okay. But again, let's give it a month and a half, and then we can reevaluate. And if he's still struggling, we can have a different conversation. Next question from @Guillermo_. How long do you think it's going to take for Dalton to get to be effective? It looks like he's having a hard time with NBA range. First of all, Guillermo, that is a great name. That is also my middle name. So shout out to you. I like your name. But with Dalton, similar to what I just said about Austin, I don't want to overreact. I think JJ had a line in after a game or before a game, or around one of the games at Palm Springs, where he was like, I started a season something like 3 for 24, 6 for 24, whatever, from 3 and shot 40% from 3 that season. So like you can get off to a slow start and still have a good shooting season. I expect that's the case for Dalton Knecht. Some of it I'm sure is nerves. Some of it is just reacting and adjusting to the pace of the NBA game. It is much different than even practices and scrimmages. It's much different than summer league. So we saw in summer league, he got off to a slowish start and progressively started to play better and become more efficient. I thought he looked better in the fourth quarter against Golden State. And granted, it was garbage time and the game was already settled, and he's playing against Golden State, second and third and even fourth unit players. So it's not necessarily what it's going to look like in the regular season. I also think Dalton has been probably in a higher usage role than we'll see in the regular season. I think he's been taking some shots that he probably won't take necessarily in the regular season. But playing when he plays more with LeBron and AD and Austin and DLo and Rui, and is more of like the third option at best in some lineups, but often more of like the fourth or fifth option, and the rotation tightens a bit, and he's not playing with a JHS or Bronny, and it's more about him playing with like the starters or like the top 6, top 7. That's when I think you'll see the shot selection improve. And if he's on the floor with LeBron and AD, he's going to get quality shots, and I think he's going to make them. So Dalton's another guy that there's so many things with a rookie, just adjusting to your role, adjusting to like, you got to process so much information on both sides of the ball. And I think there's just a steep learning curve for most rookies, and he's being thrust into a rotation role. He's being thrust into a valuable role off the bench as a scorer and a shooter. So I do expect Dalton to have a little bit of a learning curve as things progress. I think he's probably going to hit the rookie wall at some point midway through the season, but I think overall he's going to be a guy who shoots at least 36% from three, if not better than that. And maybe he shoots 36% because he's taking such a high volume of them. But this is a guy who has the green light. I'm not concerned with Dalton. I'm more concerned with the other parts of his game of like, how does his defense translate? Can he keep up some of the defensive effort that he's shown through the preseason into the regular season? Like, how is he going to handle when teams bring him into the pick and roll and his man is screening for a Steph Curry, a Luka, a Shea? Like, teams are going to pick on Dalton defensively. That's the area of the floor I have concerns with and want to see how he continues to progress and develop. But offensively, he's a shooter, he's a scorer, he's going to go through slumps, but I think he's been very confident. He's taken some shots that I don't feel like have been great, but at the same time, he's had the confidence to take them. Like, yes, the Lakers need him. Yes, they need him to shoot and score at a certain level, and he's had flashes of it. Has he been as effective and efficient as the Lakers would like, as fans would like? No. But again, this is another situation where I want to give it 4 to 6 weeks. And if we're having the same conversation in mid to late November and Dalton is really struggling, then maybe you scale down his role. Maybe you rely more on Max. You rely more on Cam Reddish. Maybe Vando's back at that point and you could phase Dalton out of the rotation. But I think for now, let's recognize like this is a rookie. This is a rookie adjusting to NBA defense, NBA pace, NBA schematics. And until we have a larger sample size and more data points with Dalton, I don't think we should overreact. And final question from @YangBorder. If you had to guess, who are the players from today's roster that will still be Lakers in 5 years? Okay, so this is a fun one to close out the mailbag. 5 years from now puts us at 2029. We'd be entering the 2029-2030 season. And at that point, I'm going to assume LeBron James is no longer playing in the NBA. He would be 44, about to be turning 45 in year 27, which would be just absolutely absurd. So I think it's safe to say LeBron's probably not on the roster. I'm going to pull up the roster here on Basketball Reference. AD in 2029 would be he'd already be 36, going to be turning 37 that season. I wonder if AD is still even playing then. I think he's capable of still playing then and still being effective, but 5 years from now, 36-year-old, 37-year-old Anthony Davis, given his injury history, I do wonder. Like I would assume he's still probably playing, but that's an interesting one. My guess AD's not on the Lakers at that point, but maybe he's the second or like third guy next to a new star or a new couple of stars. Christian Wood, I think, is probably out of the NBA. D'Lo would be 33, set to be 34 that season. I don't think he's a Laker. Gabe Vincent, same thing, 33, going to be 34. I don't think he's a Laker. Rui would be 31. I don't think he's a Laker. Austin, so I guess to save you going player by player, I would probably guess if I had to pick three guys likely to be Lakers at that point, I think Austin, Max, and Dalton are the three guys I would lean. Maybe I go Dalton with the most certainty because he's the youngest in the sense of like career, and he would be in year 5 years from now, he'd be entering year 6. So just based, like, you can keep a player on your books through the first 6-7 years, really the first couple of contracts in the modern NBA. Like that's really how this plays out. Maybe a guy gets good enough to demand out, but if you want to keep a player under contract, you could basically keep them through the first couple of contracts. So I would say Dalton is the guy that's the most likely to be a Laker. I would say Max is probably second. And then I would say it's close for me between Austin and AD. I think AD is just a matter of, does he still want to be playing? Like, how is he aged? How have the injuries gone over the next 5 years? Austin, he is going to be potentially a free agent in a couple of years. He has that player option on his contract. I think he'll likely get a raise at that point. So it just comes down to who's offering him the most money, the best role. That could be the Lakers. That could be somewhere else. 5 years is a long time. So like, I think my answer, 3 years, like 3 years, I would say AD is the only like my answer changes 3 years from now, where I would say AD I actually have the most confidence in being a Laker, and then probably Dalton second, Max third, etc. But longer term, I think it opens up the possibility of a guy like Austin just being a Laker for life, or having one of like a Derek Fisher type career, maybe minus the championship. Like we'll see, or how many championships he could get. But so. Yeah, I would say I would put it at Dalton 1, Max 2, and then I'd probably lean Austin at number 3, but I think it's going to be close between Austin and AD for number 3. But then if you said like 3 years from now, I'd probably go AD 1, Dalton 2, Max / Austin at 3. So I think those are like the 4 guys in general I have the most confidence in. JHS, Maxwell Lewis, Bronny, I think there's a lot of questions with those guys and their NBA futures. Jackson Hayes, Cam Reddish, Christian Wood, I think there's a chance they wouldn't be Lakers right now if they didn't have their player options. D'Lo, Gabe Vincent, I think those guys will be at different phases of their career 5 years from now. Vando is an interesting one, but like role players just tend to bounce around and don't stay in one place for a while. Like Austin is a guy that the Lakers have kept through multiple trade cycles, kept him out of multiple trade. Kyrie Irving, DeJounte Murray, like the Lakers are very high on Austin. So I could see Austin he's this beloved fan figure and beloved internally. So like he might be the type of exception that just ends up being in LA. It's obviously been great for him personally of just, you become this star role player and has all his endorsements and partnerships and stuff. So like Austin's a guy I could see being here longer term. And then AD, again, he's already in year 13. At that point, we're talking about year 18 for Anthony Davis, age 36, 37. He might not be playing basketball anymore, but he also might just be on like the back nine of his careers. And that will do it for today's episode. Thank you so much for watching and listening. For those on YouTube, again, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. For those listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. I'll be back tonight with a post-game reaction, hopefully live. Going to try to go live after the Lakers-Suns preseason game. JJ Redick called this a dress rehearsal, so we will see from a schematic standpoint how the Lakers approach it, and if they come with a more opponent-specific game plan, but also from a rotation and minutes and lineups perspective, what that looks like. So I'm sure we will have a lot to talk about post-game, so be on the lookout for that, and I will talk to you then.